Krakow runs on milk bars. On paper, they're no-fuss, subsidized canteens where you can get affordable yet filling home-cooked meals.
It reminds me the food that my grandma prepared. You can easily eat two-course meal for €2, €3 tops.
But in practice, milk bars, or bar milczne, are egalitarian culinary temples that serve the heartiest staples of Polish cuisine. A sour żurek soup, a massive pork cutlet breaded and fried, and the king of them all, pierogi ruskie, dumplings stuffed with a slightly tangy kind of cottage cheese called twaróg that soothes an ailing soul. I recently spent a weekend visiting more than 10 milk bars all across Krakow, from what was supposed to be the model communist city without God, Nowa Huta, to small shops in and around the city's ever-popular medieval Old Town. First, I meet up with Michał Turecki, a born and raised Krakowian food guide, writer, and cook who can trace milestones of his life back to milk bars.
I always thought that my grandma is making the best ruskie pierogi in the world. And after she passed away, I went here, tried those specific pierogi here, and I cried myself over the plate because it was so reminding me of her pierogi. So this is the best ruskie pierogi you can have in Krakow, in Poland, anywhere.
I'll get to try these legendary pierogi myself later on, but first, we start at Bar Centralny for a little breakfast.
Here we have the simple roll with the egg spread. It contains hard-boiled eggs, onions, some mayonnaise, salt and pepper, and this is chives on top. And this is a cocoa.
Cocoa for breakfast is a legacy of coffee shortages during the communist period. It doesn't have caffeine, but it's still a piping hot drink to start your day.
The milk bars became really popular after the Second World War, and people still had to eat, so they were given the food stamps in the workplaces, so they could go to the milk bars and eat. It was around 70,000 in the 60s.
70,000 milk
Yeah.
bars. Oh my god.
Yeah, it was really on every corner. So
it was like the original Starbucks.
yeah, but without coffee, maybe cocoa or wheat coffee, some invention that we made because we don't have access to coffee.
Michał's been going to the milk bars for a few decades at this point, but it was his late grandmother who first introduced him to milk bars at an early age.
And she took me to the milk bars because, as she told me, this is the place where you can eat food that feels like home. Sometimes you can even get shouted like in homes. Everything just feel like home.
And why would you get shouted at? That's no reason.
Because they are too slow, you don't have a change. It can be really crowded in lunch hours. So you have to decide quickly. Sometimes people working in milk bars can shout at you, but don't care. Just like a form of communication.
Luckily, it's still quiet when we get to Bar Północny for some dumplings with, to my surprise, all kinds of sugar sprinkled on top.
Yeah, it was some saying in Poland after the Second World War that cukier krzepi, that sugar makes you stronger. Because we have a shortage of pretty much everything, but we had a lot of sugar. So the most popular things in milk bars were the ones that make you feel stronger after eating it, and those were sometimes covered with sugar.
The sugary ride continues across town in the student district at Żazek for some Polish apple pancakes, or as I've come to think of them, burrito-sized blintzes. Very tart. Oh.
Sugar is very sweet, so this is the best.
I know, I just accidentally inhaled some sugar.
Yeah.
Right back in my throat. But there's some savoriness to be had as well.
This is actually Polish gnocchi.
It tastes way more potato-y than like an actual gnocchi, but it's really good. One of the things you first notice at the milk bars is who's cooking. It's 99% no-nonsense women in their 50s and 60s, because that's who knows how to cook these traditional dishes, not the men and not the young cooks coming out of culinary school charging $15 for shakshuka.
It's hard work, sometimes with very hard people. Probably the wages are even smaller than in the other places.
Picking a favorite milk bar seems to have more to do with a personal connection you establish with the place than just the quality of the food. Generally speaking, most milk bars are pretty similar with, at times, matching menus. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. For a visitor, it means you're more likely to get the true, unfiltered milk bar experience.
You will still meet pretty much the same lady at the counter. That she looks the same, she has the same Polish smile on her face. But she is friendly. When someone doesn't have the money to eat to pay for the full portion of soup and ask for the half of it, they always fill it to the full. So they're really good-hearted person. You have to have heart to serve food for the poorest people with dignity.
Alright folks, that does it for day one. After visiting count them, six milk bars. I believe Mikhail called such a feat ridiculous or insane. Something to that effect. And look, I know it's a tough gig, but somebody has to shoulder that burden, and I guess this time it's me. But in all seriousness, I absolutely loved today. To be honest, I wasn't super looking forward to this trip because I just had a lot of travel coming up before the trip and I have a lot of travel coming up after, and I wasn't sure if I'd have the energy to do this story justice, but I don't know what it is about being in Krakow or doing this story or working on this story, but it seems like I found an extra energy tank of sorts. As soon as I hit the ground in Nowa Huta and met up with Mikhail, I was just excited to learn everything I could about milk bars and be having this experience, and to not learn more just about the history of milk bars, but to really understand their purpose. When Mikhail was talking about how you're getting a home-cooked meal from people who essentially could be your grandmother because that's who's in the kitchen, it felt to me that like maybe the moral crux of milk bars is the dignity of getting a home-cooked meal, because, you know, when I think about the States, if you don't have a lot of money, you're probably going to a fast food restaurant like McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, all that stuff. And that's not necessarily soul-soothing food, because that's not food that anybody makes at home. That's certainly not food that grandma made. But here in Poland, in Krakow, if you're going through tough times and you can't afford to, you know, make yourself a home-cooked meal, maybe you don't have the skills, or you just can't afford to get a good meal anywhere, you can go to these milk bars and get a delicious, filling, home-cooked meal. And to me, that speaks to the dignity that milk bars and their food can provide people. Good morning, sports fans. I am back at it. It is day 2 of exploring the milk bars of Krakow, and I am going to be meeting up with today's guide, Conrad from Delicious Poland. And you know, like anyone else, I can complain about the work I do in this world, but it's in times like these when I'm going to visit 6 more milk bars after visiting 6 yesterday that I realize it could be worse. It can definitely be worse. Conrad was born in Canada to Polish parents, but moved back as a child as soon as communism fell. Milk bars have been a part of his life ever since.
Both of my parents, they were academic teachers, so they work at the different universities here in Krakow. So on the way to work or after work, or when we would just go downtown, we would sometimes hop into a milk bar to get something. So it's actually a very fond memory that I have, that we were sometimes on the way back home and we didn't know what to eat. And we decided to go to milk bar and get a full set of food, and we would just feel so happy because, you know, it filled us up. It was homemade food at a high quality and at a low price.
Like the day before, we start off with another egg roll for breakfast, which a lot of Poles make for themselves at home.
When I make it at home, I will just take off one slice or I'll have it like this, but you can have it both ways. So I would maybe try to hold it subconsciously, like over here. I think what's important to say is that the bun in Polish bułka, in general in Poland we love our bułkas for breakfast. So very often at home, if I want to make something nice for my family, in the morning I'll wake up and I'll go to the local bakery to buy some bułkas, which is important because if I go too late, for example at this hour, they're all sold out. This is the base traditional bułka is called a kaiserka, from German Kaiser, so it's, yeah, Kaiser roll, Kaiserbrötchen, and in Polish we just call it kaiserka. So this is the basic thing that you can find everywhere. So, smacznego. It's chunky.
This actually reminds me almost like an egg salad or something.
Kind of.
Yeah. Before we head to our next stop, Conrad and I sit down for a little chat. He explains to me what milk bars mean to him.
I would say that it's a delicious relic of communism. So there's not many very things that communists got right, but milk bars was definitely one of those things. And actually, whenever I took friends, I had some foreigner friends living in Krakow, exchange students and others. I would definitely recommend them to go to milk bars, and they'll take them, telling them that over here it's maybe not the most fanciest place to eat, but it is definitely a place where you can eat well at a low cost. And on top of that, you get the free addition of traveling a little bit back in time, because very often the decor of a milk bar will reminisce what used to be in the 80s or 70s, and sometimes, as I already told you, the attitude of the workers would also reminisce those times. Of course, that has changed, so the more modern milk bars today, the ones that still exist, they have already somewhat adjusted to the realities of market capitalism.
Well, good for them, because I'm still trying to adjust to the realities of market capitalism. For our next stop, we ignore what time of day it is and embrace the Polish sweet tooth for some dessert.
So this is something that, for example, my mom will get very often. It buys very well into the Polish idea of what a dessert should be, because it's sweet but not overpoweringly sweet. And for my mom, this is just a very convenient dessert. So she'll cook her own soup, she'll make her own main meal, but then she just doesn't want to bother with dessert, so she'll pre-buy the pancakes, naleśniki, and she'll pre-buy them with sweet cheese that very often contains raisins. The ones we have over here don't contain raisins, but still they're going to be sweet, but as I said, not overpoweringly sweet. So the cheese, the Polish white cheese known as twaróg, in itself is very neutral in taste. So that's why it goes very well with many different things. So you can have it both in the savory or in the sweet form.
Sweet things aren't usually my jam, but in the name of research, I shovel onward, leaving room for one of my favorite dishes across the milk bars of Krakow.
So you're eating the vegetarian version, but is also a very traditional version because you're having kasha. So kasha is absolutely the also basic dish of Polish cuisine. It's so basic that it's also the most historical dish. So before we had potatoes, the ones I'm having for the discovery of America, eating cereal grains was the basis of all Polish cuisine. It's a very bland thing to have. That's why you're having it with some sauce, which is some mushroom sauce. But you can have kasha with a variety of dishes. So for example, personally, one way that I love to have kasha is with Hungarian-style goulash. So not that I'll put the kasha into a stew, but rather I'll have a pile of kasha, and then on top of it I'll put some goulash sauce just to give it some flavor. So it's a very simple, very straightforward dish, but I would say also very good and very filling.
It's right up there with my beetroot soup with mushroom stuffed dumplings from the day before. These are some of the most traditional Polish dishes you can find. Conrad's noshing on a Polish staple too.
So the pork cutlet, it's the basis of all Polish cuisine. I would say that this is the most basic lunch meal that you can get in Poland. So it's a pork chop, schab in Polish, with some potatoes and usually a helping of various vegetables. So here what I got is ćwikła, which is beetroot, grated beetroot. This is a basic Polish dish. So besides pierogi ruskie, I would say that this is the thing that a Polish person would get a hankering for. And usually, maybe 80% of the time I get this dish, I'll have it with a beer. So I'll go somewhere downtown in Krakow, I'll have it with a beer. Here, since milk bars do not serve alcohol, we went for kefir, which is a type of yogurt that is naturally sour. I like to have my kefir with a little bit of salt. which some people might consider unusual, but I think it elevates the taste and goes very well with overcooking here. So this is a very comforting, very simple dish to have.
And that's the key, friends. Comforting, simple dishes.
So over here we have kluski śląskie, which very often are translated as dumplings, but I don't fully agree with that translation because for me a dumpling has to have a filling. So kluski in Polish, it's a very different word from the Polish translation of dumpling, which is pierogi. Kluski is basically something that is a flour-based dish that is a little bit gelatinous, glutinous dish. So over here, because they are very neutral in their flavor, they are covered in a sauce. So on the menu, we had several different variations. We decided to go with the mushroom sauce, but you can have them with simply with butter. You can have them with a goulash sauce. You can have them with a hunter's sauce.
At this point, I've more than met my limit for gluttony. Or so I thought, until Conrad promised some Polish pickles, a sweet apple and rice dessert, and one final helping of pierogi ruskie, which despite the sound of it, does not refer to Russia.
The name for the dumplings is cheese and potato dumplings in English, but in Polish, historically, traditionally, we call them pierogi ruskie, but now a lot of people started calling them pierogi ukraińskie because they thought that ruskie means Russian, but actually the name Rus is the old historical name for Ukraine. So when you go far enough into the history of Ukraine, the country was called the Kievan Rus. And that was actually a country that is much older than modern Russia. So it was only some 200 years ago that the Duchy of Moscow, after it took some Ukrainian lands, it also decided to take the name of Ukraine and take it as its own. So it was a switch that was so successful that 200 years later, today, people just assume naturally that the name Ruski means Russian. And I made the same mistake when I was a teenager in a milk bar, and this very nice, elegant gentleman, he interrupted me, said, "No, not Russian, Ruthenian." And then he explained to me the history of Ruthenia, and that is something that I always made sure to incorporate during my tours when introducing Polish cuisine.
Alright, now that we're all on the same page with the pierogi ruskie, let's try a Polish pickle.
So Polish pickles, they're nothing like Western style pickles, which use a magical, mystical ingredient known as vinegar. Polish pickles, nothing like that. Polish pickles are basically, we let them just sit in a jar until they naturally get sour with several other ingredients like salt, dill, garlic. So they have an extra kick to them because they are extra sour. And then over here we have a very traditional Polish dessert, very basic Polish dessert that rises a few eyebrows around the world because it's basically rice mixed with apples with some cinnamon around and then covered with some sweet cream. It's a comfort food, so it's not supposed to look appetizing, but it is very filling and it is very nice because it's very sweet, but not overwhelmingly sweet. So we call this ryż z jabłkami.
Yeah, I mean, it looks weird, but there are plenty of cultures around the world that have rice-based desserts. Mm-hmm. This one just looks like a more hastily prepared version of it. It's almost like rice, cinnamon, apples, soda sweet cream. Go have your dessert.
Because they put it on the plate. My mom, she puts it in the bowl.
Yeah, I bet you could make it look
It looks nice.
aesthetically pleasing if that's your shtick. Friends, you don't need to visit as many milk bars as I have to start wondering, why isn't this a thing all over the world? Everyone deserves the dignity of an affordable, home-cooked meal without being forced to consume some mass-produced fast food slop scrounged together using questionable ingredients from questionable sources. Frankly, if it were exclusively up to market capitalism, I bet they would have done away with milk bars long ago. And considering the women working there now can't live forever, it got me worried about the future of this incredible institution.
I hope and I fear. So I fear that, and I think your question is pointing to that unfortunately they might just be a type of business that will just phase out with time. But I do know that there is a sensibility in the society. So the closure of some of the more popular milk bars in recent weeks, months, has resonated in society. So now we're going to have our local elections. So everything is up in the air. So I think there might be a push to reinstitute some elements, but I would say that this is an element of a wider debate on the nature of tourism in Krakow, because this is part of our heritage right now, a heritage that you should protect, but then how do you protect? Because you can be accused of favoring some businesses over others. So it's a very tricky issue. So I'm thinking that the love for milk bars will not disappear, and that we might see more attempts to recreate milk bars in one way or another by private business owners. But I'm not certain of the future of every single milk bar.
Milk bars will survive, but I don't know who will be cooking in those places. Because people who are living culinary schools right now dream about cooking in the Michelin star restaurants and not in a milk bar. I don't know who will cook there, but as long as city and country will support the milk bars, they will stay out.
And on that cheery note, I'm gonna leave you with some tips on what to look for when visiting a milk bar.
When you enter a milk bar, you don't want it to be brand new. You don't want it to scream brand new. You want to find a place that is a little bit more rustical. But then again, it really depends what you're going to be served. And I would say the most important point is the prices. So a milk bar is supposed to be homemade food that is at an affordable price. That was the basic concept at the foundation during communist period. And that's the thing that has tried to survive until today. So Polish food, Polish comfort food is supposed to be readily accessible to everybody, not only those who can pay high prices for them. They are a landmark of both the Krakow, the city, and the country, and they are an important staple of Polish cuisine. So Polish cuisine, Polish culture, you know, has hundreds years of history, so there's lots of many different things you can find. So very often when I have people coming from abroad to Krakow, they'll ask me very often about the best restaurants that you can find in Krakow, which are restaurants that are very fancy, which are a type of cuisine. But at the same time, I really think it's important to cultivate what is at the baseline, what the average commoner could afford back in the day and could have today. I really think that it's a perfect gateway for anyone who's coming to Poland and wants to learn about Polish cuisine. It doesn't necessarily want to spend half of their wallet on the food. It's just the perfect place to go. You can get a full meal, basic soup, a meal, and then you can even get a small dessert.
We have numerous good restaurants with Polish cuisine in Krakow, but if you want to try food that feels like home, go to Babcia.